Every year, I have a whole bunch of prospective families, prospective college students and their families, who come to visit my office at the university. And they all come with basically the same request. I want to be a doctor. How are you going to get me there? What are you going to do to get me to medical school so that I can be a doctor? Now, most of these students, it seems very clearly that their parents are the driving force behind them and behind their being there and asking questions. And in fact, mom or dad usually sit there and jump into the conversation and take it over, asking questions. Well, what are you going to do? How is my child going to get to the best medical school that's out there if I send them here to your institution? What are you going to do? Because I already know that my little darling is the best and the brightest out there. What are you going to do for them? Well, of course, there's nothing I can do. I can't guarantee that they are going to get to medical school. That's on them, not on us. I can't make them a doctor, and neither can their parents. So I turn and I start to ask them questions. And I ask them if they are willing to do the hard work that it takes to be prepared for medical school. Are you willing to do whatever it takes? Are you willing to study hard? Are you willing to be there late in the lab at night when your friends are out partying? Are you willing to pass organic chemistry without killing your teacher? What is it that you are willing to do? And I usually also ask them, are you really so gung-ho to be a doctor? Would you be so gung-ho if the salary for a doctor were less than a school teacher? And eyes begin to pop open. What is it that you really want? Is it the fame and the glory, the status in society, the money, all of the above? And the unspoken answer is almost always, yes. That's what I want. In today's text from Mark chapter 10, we hear the continued saga of James and John. There are stories about James and John earlier as well. And here we see these two brothers and disciples of Christ. In Matthew's story of this particular version of this particular story, we discovered that the brothers were not only there questioning Jesus, but they brought their mother with them. Who brings their mother to talk to Jesus? Are you kidding? But the mother wanted the same thing for them. And the mother was the driving force that said, my boys are special. These are the brightest of the brightest. What are you going to do for them, Jesus? I have a request for you. Now, in her defense, Matthew says she actually knelt down and worshiped Jesus before she started pelting him with questions. Nobody's ever done that to me at the university. But they pulled Jesus aside. They want a private conversation. They don't want the other disciples to hear. So they pull Jesus aside and they say to him, hey, Jesus, can you do whatever we ask of you? Now that's the kind of cunning little question that I expect of children. In fact, I know my children played that game quite a few times. Some of you were nodding. I said your children did too. In fact, I'll go ahead and admit that I played that game when I was a kid as well. Hey, Dad, will you do whatever I need? Oh, sure, son, what do you need? Wrong way to play. Because as soon as you say yes, now you're stuck, right? So they ask Jesus, they begin by saying, just like children, hey, Jesus, will you do whatever I want? Now, if it was me and I was talking to Jesus, as soon as Jesus said yes, it'd be something like, hey, Jesus, I really would like a lifetime supply of dark chocolate and the ability to eat it all without gaining any weight. I think I also would be thinking about those stories from my childhood where somebody found a bottle on the beach And they rubbed it, and out came the genie. And the genie gave them 3 wishes, right? You've all heard these stories, okay? Actually, the right way to go about that, by the way, is the first wish should be, I wish for 1,000 more wishes, because then I can get all my dark chocolate and take care of all the problems of the world. Nobody's ever found one of those magic bottles, unfortunately. But when Jesus asked James and John what it is that they want, they go for something much, much bigger than a seat in medical school, or all the dark chocolate, or even the ability to solve the world's problems with 1,000 wishes. No, they want to sit at his side in heaven for eternity. I kind of imagine them dreaming about sitting in heaven and having all of the others, especially the other disciples, look over them and say, wow, they're really special. Maybe I should have treated them better when we were on earth. Or at least I should have been better friends with them. I didn't know that they were so special. Boy, those 2 really made it. In today's society, we spend a lot of time trying to keep up with the Joneses and desiring to have more than everybody else we know. We expect others to acknowledge our importance, even if it's all in our head. Our political system is a good example of this. It's completely broken, torn apart by self-important people who demand respect, even when they're wrong, and even when there's no basis for that respect. Meanwhile, good people who work hard to be successful, are often overshadowed by those who receive power through insider appointments and favoritism. And we so easily mix up the ideas of need and want. I know I do, all the time. Mary Ann and I were out shopping recently. We like to go to antique stores. And I walk along and I see things and I say, I want, just like a little kid. It's not that I need any of those things. It's not that they're important. It's that they make me feel good. I want. And I think James and John were in that same kind of boat. It's not something they needed, it's something they wanted because it would give them power and status. And that's what they wanted. Now, notice that what Jesus said to them was, you don't know what you're asking. And he was probably shaking his head, sort of like I do quietly when all these parents start pelting me with questions about their precious little one. Are you kidding, parents? That's not the right question. What are you doing, getting in the way? But notice also that Jesus didn't rebuke them or punish them. Jesus didn't say to them, well, because you asked for so much, I'm not going to give you anything ever. Maybe that's what I would do as a parent, but that's not what Jesus said. And he didn't say, you pushed too hard this time. Guys, you're no longer my disciples. Go home. And he didn't say, your request is incredibly selfish and immature. That makes me angry, and I'm sending you straight to hell. No, he didn't say any of that stuff. Instead, he reiterated the fact that violence and death were awaiting him in Jerusalem, and asks, are you ready to follow me? Are you ready to have people angry at you? Are you ready to not be the one that people look up to? Are you ready to die for the cause of the cross? He also told them again and again, I'm not the kind of king that you think I'm going to be. I'm not the kind of king who can appoint you to a position of power or give you special status. No, that's not what we're doing here, guys. And I know that James and John and probably all the other disciples are sitting there thinking, but Jesus, we worked so hard. We've done everything you asked. We followed you. We gave up our lives. Shouldn't there be some special reward for us down the line? Yeah, there is. But not the kind that they were thinking of. Not what they thought was due to them at that time. Of course, James and John weren't the only disciples thinking this. All of them were. It's just that James and John got the jump on the others. They were a little bit more forward. They went up to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, come over here. We need to talk to you. While the others were a little bit more shy and timid about it. They were upset, Mark says. They were angry with James and John. You know, the pre-medical students get like this all the time. They get very upset and angry when they discover that a teacher or a research leader has given special favor to one student over another, and they think they should have gotten that too. Usually that student gets favor because they were forward. They pushed. They said, hey, me. And the teacher said, yes, okay, you. Instead of thinking about all of the others. The old adage that, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease is true not only in the corporate world, but it's true in school as well. It's true in life in general. Those who are self-promoters often get promoted whether they're the best or not, whether they're the most qualified or not. They are the ones who oftentimes get the rewards. The disciples could see that clearly. Self-promotion. In fact, one of my colleagues told me recently that several years ago, she complained to the dean when she discovered that two other people in the department had higher salaries than hers and less experience and less preparation. And when she complained, the dean said, well, that's your fault. You should be a better negotiator. You should be a better self-promoter. If you would come in here and demanded a higher salary, I would have given it to you. The squeaky wheel gets to move forward. James and John were squeaky wheels. Well, Jesus realized that all of the disciples were angry and they were all worried about their own status. And Jesus turned and gave them a concept that still today creates tension and division in our society. Jesus says to the group, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be a slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The concept here of servant leadership is what Jesus is driving at. But unfortunately, within these verses is one tricky word, slave. So let me start with that for just a moment and get that one off the table so it doesn't create a concern for us. In fact, earlier this week, in trying to pick out the hymns for this service, David noted to me that so many of the songs that fit this passage well that we could have sung this morning use the word slave. And in today's sensitive, rightly so, sensitive atmosphere around Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and so many other things, being a slave isn't something that we necessarily want to sing about in the church or even be reminded about. So why is it in this passage? What did Jesus mean when he said, be a slave? Well, there's certainly some disagreement on this. Biblical scholars do not agree on what Jesus was saying. But most of the biblical scholars that I looked up note that the term slave here really means indentured servant. They received wages. They received training. They were often a part of the family or the company, and they had a long-term obligation, often to pay a debt that might be theirs or that of a deceased family member. In fact, one biblical scholar that I consulted notes that in America, the first black slaves were actually indentured servants in the Northeast, in the original colonies, serving side by side with indentured servants from England and Ireland. They were all referred to as slaves. That was the word that was used. But in fact, it was quite different than the slaves that we think of in the South, not too much further down the time scale than that. Not what most of us read in the U.S. history books. But it's important to understand that distinction or that difference here when we are wondering why Jesus speaks of being a slave. Yes, indentured servants worked long hours. Yes, they did whatever their masters required, but they were usually treated well overall and had many freedoms that conquered or purchased slaves did not. So moving away from that word, getting back to the idea that Jesus is calling people to be a servant. To be first, to be greatest, you must serve your fellow humans. Here he contrasts the way that the Gentile rulers, and in fact, most of our rulers today, treat those that they rule over, and the way that Christ's followers are supposed to treat others. Don't follow the example of contemporary rulers, he told them. Show them that there's a better way. Show them that real leaders don't need to bully people, or as Jesus said, lord it over them and tyrannize them. To be a servant leader, and I would argue to be a true leader, means not asking others to do something that you're not willing to do. Whether it's in school, in business, in politics, or even in the church. Jesus certainly demonstrated this over and over again. Remember Jesus washing the feet of the disciples? That's something only a servant does. Jesus led as a servant leader. And Jesus expects us to be servant leaders as well. And this idea has been echoed down through history over and over and over again. Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Albert Einstein noticed that only a life lived in the service of others is worth living at all. And even Muhammad Ali said, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. Serving others. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about church or business or school or politics or anything else. Serving others is the way to become a true leader. To follow Jesus and to do what he is calling you to do means being a servant. It means not thinking that anything is beneath your dignity or beneath your scope or too important to take on. It means having a willing heart, willing to do whatever Jesus tasks you with, whatever others need you to help them with, whatever helps to build the kingdom of God. Wouldn't it be a fabulous world if every Christian had the heart of a servant? Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if all of the corporate and government leaders had servant hearts? Would there be any wars? Would there be the separation of the haves and the have-nots that we have today? Would there be any hunger and homelessness throughout our country? I pray this day that God will continue making me a servant, for only then can I understand the true nature of being a follower of Christ. Only then can I focus on Christ's call and Christ's mission instead of on my own wants and desires. And I pray the same for each of you as you listen to where God is calling you this day. Let me conclude by restating the words that David and Molly let us in just before this sermon. Make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak. And may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant. Make me a servant. Make me a servant today.